Welcome back to 40 TV. I'm your host, 40. Today we're going over a plugin that's available for Cinema 4D called Xplode. It sells for €12, which equates to about $15.50. It's available for Cinema 4D R12 Studio through R14 Studio in version 1.3. And basically what it does is it breaks apart your geometry of an object into the amount of pieces that you specify. So let's get started. I'm going to add a cube to my scene, and I'm going to change the size in Y to 5 centimeters, the size in X and Z to 2000. Whoops. This cube is going to act as a floor in my scene. Next, I'm going to go ahead and add another cube to my scene. I'm going to raise it up to approximately 102.5 centimeters, so it's sitting directly on my floor. This is what I'm going to break apart. So there's a couple ways I can do this. The first way is to directly use the cube itself by coming up to plugins, going to Xplode. It will bring us our options here, and within the options, basically, there's only a few parameters you need to set. The random seed is going to change where it delineates the number of parts or sets the thinking particle points. So right now, the number of parts are how many parts do we want to break this cube up into. So this can be set to whatever we want. Let's set it to 50. If I click on add here, it's going to set these thinking particle points within my scene based on the random seed. If I click on clear and change the random seed and click on add, it's going to change where those particles are placed within my object. These particles are what are going to delineate the fractures or the breaks within the geometry. Next, over here, the inside material, if I want to have a different type of material for the inside or the breakage of the pieces, I can go ahead and apply that by dragging it into this box here. After that, I can go ahead and select what these broken pieces are going to be set into: a null object, a matrix object, a fracture object, or a cloner object. I'm going to select a fracture object because that's typically what I use. Now if I click on scatter, and then click on clear to remove these thinking particle points, you won't really see what's happened just yet. I'm going to close Xplode, click on display, and change to Garud shading plus lines. Now you'll see that we have these different pieces. If I expand the pieces group here, select one of the polygons, I don't know, let's select this one, and I drag it out, you'll see that it broke that little piece out of this cube. I'm going to press Apple Z, and I'm going to collapse this. Now by default, nothing is going to happen. If I press play in my scene, nothing is going to happen. I can go ahead and select this pieces, right click, and add a dynamics tag by going to simulation tags and going to rigid body. Now if I go over here to collision and I change the individual elements from off to all and I press play on my keyboard, well, we'll notice that I forgot to add a dynamics tag to the floor. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on the cube here, which is our floor, go to simulation tags, select rigid body. Then I'm going to click on dynamics and make sure dynamics is set to off. That's because I don't want my floor to drop when I press play. Next, I'm going to change the name of cube to floor so to lessen our confusion. If I press play on my keyboard, you're going to see that this now breaks apart into all those pieces. If I go back to frame 1, I can select the dynamics tag for pieces or our fractured object and then change. If we come down here to, actually I think it's under collision. If we select collision, we can change our bounce and our friction. By increasing our friction value, let's say to 100%, what's going to happen is it's going to try to hold its mass together. When I press play, we'll notice it's barely breaking apart. Now if I set this friction to 10%, for example, rewind and press play, it easily breaks apart, right? And what happens when it interacts, so this little bounce percentage, if I change this to 5% and I rewind, you're going to notice it bounces less on the floor, right? So by playing with these two settings, maybe set this up to 75, leave that at 5% for the bounce, we notice we've got something cool going on there. Next, we can have something else break this apart. Instead of having gravity do its thing, let's say we add a sphere to our scene. I'll click and hold on the cube here, come over to sphere, and then I'm going to click and drag it up on the y-axis. Next, I need to add a rigid body tag to this. So I'm going to go ahead and control click on the pieces dynamics tag and drag it up to the sphere tag itself. We'll make sure dynamics is on, and now when we press play, it's going to break apart, but they're not interacting with each other. The reason for that is you need to select your cube or these pieces select the Dynamics tag, and come over here from Trigger, change it from Immediately to On Collision. Now, when the sphere drops and it hits this cube, that's what's going to break it apart. Okay, pretty cool. Let's rewind. Let's zoom out a little bit, and then let's drag the sphere up a little bit in our scene. We're also going to scale it down. I'll press T on my keyboard. I'll go ahead and scale this thing down a little bit, and I want to change the mass of the cube so that when it hits this, it really breaks it apart harder. So if we go into the Dynamics tag of the sphere, we go into mass, and we change the world density to custom density, and add maybe instead of 1, change it to 15. We'll notice when we press play, boom, it really gets into that cube. Now, of course, if we change this number even higher, it's going to do even more damage. You can see it really does a number on the cube itself, right? So that's having one object interact with another with the Dynamics tab of a fractured object. Okay, so that's all good and dandy. But what if we need more control? So I'm going to go ahead and delete the pieces up to the sphere, and the only thing I have left in my scene is a floor. I'm going to go ahead and create a cube just like we did before. I'll press E on my keyboard to get the move tool. I'll drag this up a little. In fact, it's supposed to be 102.5, I believe. So it's sitting on the floor. Now, what if we want more control over where those fractures are going to go? We can use another object to add the points as long as it's intersecting with this object. So what I mean by that is if I go ahead and add a sphere to my scene, after doing so, I'm going to go ahead and drag this up. I'm going to switch my viewport so I can see what I'm doing right here. And I'm going to go ahead, make sure I have my sphere selected. And I'm going to drag that there. I'm going to drag this over so that it intersects. And it looks like everything is lined up on the corner. If I switch back to my perspective view and I orbit around, we'll notice it's basically intersecting with the corner of this cube. So now if we come up to plugins, we click on Xplode, we can have the sphere selected, we can set the number of parts to 100, actually let's set it to 200. We'll click on add, you'll notice it added all these points within our sphere. We're going to click on fracture just like we did before, but now we're going to click on cube within our scene and click on scatter. I'm going to click on clear to get rid of the points within the sphere, and I'm going to close the Xplode plugin. Next, I'll select the sphere and I'll drag it up in my scene to see what will happen. I'll go ahead and orbit around the cube, and we'll notice where the sphere overlapped. Let me zoom in a little bit. Where the sphere overlapped the cube, it created a lot of particles or a lot of breaks. Where it didn't, it took those transitions and it has bigger chunks now. I can go ahead and right click on the pieces, go to simulation tags, add a rigid body tag. I can make sure that the collision individual elements is set to all. Next, I'll go ahead and control click and drag this onto the sphere. I'll make sure that my pieces tag in the dynamics area is set to on collision. And then in the sphere, I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. I'm going to switch on over to my scale. And I'm going to scale the sphere down a little bit. I'll click on the Dynamics tag of the sphere. I'll change the mass to use custom density. Select this to 10 and go ahead and zoom in a little bit so we can see what's going on. I'll press play on my transport and boom. Now you'll see it's breaking apart the corner with all those little pieces, and then we have all the big pieces remaining. You know, another thing that we can do here is if we go ahead and rewind, we get rid of our sphere. Right now, if we go ahead and press play, nothing's going to happen. But we can use Mograph effectors to affect basically this fractured body. So by that, for example, we can use the plane effector to make this explode. To do so, we're going to go ahead and click on pieces here, go up to Mograph effectors, and select the plane effector. Immediately, you'll notice the cube jumped up by 100 centimeters, and that's because by default, that's its setting. I'll go ahead and set this to 0. Next thing that we need to do is we need to change the fall-off type from infinite to something else. I'm going to use a sphere. If I go ahead and switch back to my move tool by pressing E on my keyboard, I can click and drag this plane effector and we see this sphere. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to align it with the corner. If I orbit around, I can see that I'm pretty close. It doesn't have to be exact, but I want that to be where the explosion or impact point is of this explosion. Next, if I come back on over to my pieces, if I come back over to my pieces and I click on effectors, I need to make sure the plane effector is shown here. Because we had it selected when we came up to Mograph and selected the effector, it automatically applied it. But if you didn't have it selected, you can click on the plane effector and drag it here into the effectors. Next, I'll select the plane effector. We need to be on frame 0, and we're going to animate this effector pushing in a certain direction. So if we wanted to, for example, maybe move both in the Z direction and the X direction, we can keyframe both Z and X right here, have it at 0. I'll move one frame forward, and then let's set this, I don't know, -50X and then 50Z. The way I came up with that is based on which way these arrows are pointing are the positive directions of the axis. So positive axis in Z space is this way, and then negative axis in X space is that way because the arrow is pointing this way, right? So now if I rewind, go to the beginning, I'm going to hide the plane effector from our viewport, and I'm going to press play on my transport. And we'll notice, hey, nothing happened. Let me see what I did wrong. Oh, what I did wrong is I didn't set the keyframe for these things. So for X, we said we were going to make it -50. For Z, we're going to make it 50. I'll control click to add keyframes here. I'll rewind to the beginning and I'll press play. Boom. Now we have an explosion, right? So these are some of the different ways you can use the Xplode plugin to come up with different variations, etc., etc. Guys, I hope you like this tutorial. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. I'm still learning Cinema 4D, so I'll do my best to answer them. And if you like my content, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks a lot, guys. Till next time, I'm out.